Trump was found guilty on 34 counts of falsifying business records by a jury of his peers this past spring. Trump had been scheduled to be sentenced next Tuesday on the 26th by Judge Merchan, but that was put on pause at the request of Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. In Georgia, a state appeals court cancels a hearing in the 2020 election interference case against the president-elect. Oral arguments were scheduled for next month on the appeal of a lower court ruling allowing Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis to continue to prosecute the case. Officials say the hearing is canceled until further order of the court. Axios is reporting that Trump has been calling senators to urge them to confirm his pick for attorney general. Former Representative Matt Gaetz was under an ethics committee investigation when he resigned from Congress last week, essentially stopping the probe. House Speaker Mike Johnson says the panel should not release its findings because Gaetz is no longer a member of the chamber. But Senate Democrats and some Republican senators say they want to see what's in the report before they consider Gaetz's nomination to serve as attorney general. A lawyer representing two women who testified to the House Ethics Committee about alleged wrongdoing by then Congressman Matt Gaetz says the women testified they were paid for sexual favors, and one of the women claims she witnessed Gaetz having sex with her then underage friend in 2017. Gaetz has denied any wrongdoing. Trump is continuing to build his second administration team. The president-elect saying he's picking former Wisconsin Representative Sean Duffy to be transportation secretary. Duffy served in the House for nearly 9 years before leaving Congress to work for Fox News and Fox Business. In a statement released yesterday, Trump says Duffy will help rebuild the country's infrastructure to, quote, launch a golden age of travel. Duffy is the latest ally set to help carry out Trump's agenda. Spectrum's Evan Kozloff is in Washington with more on the president-elect's plans once in office, including mass deportations.
It's going to be called a Trump mass deportation.
On the campaign trail, it was a frequent promise by then-candidate Donald Trump.
If I win, you will have the largest deportation operation in American history, starting at noon on Inauguration Day.
Now, Trump sharing more on what a mass deportation effort might look like in a 4 a.m. post on social media. Trump writing true in response to this post from the president of the conservative group Judicial Watch, that Trump will declare a national emergency and use military assets for a mass deportation effort. This comes as Trump has named a series of immigration hardliners to staff his White House.
You better start packing now.
Including the former director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Tom Homan, as his border czar. The National Guard, which falls under the Department of Defense, has played a role in border security in the past, but typically has been used for background logistics so the Border Patrol can focus on enforcement. But immigration advocates worry that the military will now be asked to play a greater role in deportations.
The way to respond is not to panic, but to come together and to build.
Oliver Maino from the Immigrant Justice Network says they're already organizing to provide legal help for immigrants and are urging local governments to step in.
In Washington, I'm Evan Kozloff, Spectrum News.
President Joe Biden is participating in a second day of meetings today between leaders from 20 of the world's major economies. Washington, D.C. reporter Angie Gonzalez has the latest on the G20 Summit in Brazil.
G20 summits always have an eye on issues like the economy and tackling climate change, but ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza remain top of mind for those in attendance this year. That's true for President Joe Biden, who's taking part in the G20 in Rio de Janeiro again today. On day one of the summit, Biden told other world leaders that during his last 2 months in office, his administration is going to keep pushing to accelerate a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas to end the war in Gaza. He also urged others in attendance to continue to support Ukraine and its ongoing war with Russia.
The United States strongly supports Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Everyone around this table, in my view, should as well. And by the way, Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine led to the highest record food prices in all of history.
One accomplishment for the group so far, a declaration endorsed by all countries in attendance with the exception of Argentina. In it, G20 members commit to providing more aid to Gaza while also working towards an end to hostilities in the Mideast and Ukraine. There was one minor hiccup Monday. President Joe Biden, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni all missed the summit's family photo. A Biden administration official says the president arrived late due to logistical issues. After participating in summit activities today, including a working lunch with the president of Brazil, Biden heads back to the White House. In Washington, Angie Gonzalez, Spectrum News.
Officials confirming a third death and a spate of stabbings in New York City. Police say a 51-year-old man reportedly attacked 3 people in different locations across Manhattan without saying a word. He was later found with blood on his clothes and with 2 kitchen knives. The attacks happened over several hours and within just a few miles of one another. New York Mayor Eric Adams said the suspect had been sentenced in a criminal case several months ago and that the violence was a clear example of failures in the criminal justice system. On Spectrum News, some serious concerns arise over the safety of the astronauts on board the International Space Station. We'll have the latest updates for you right after this.
Substance use disorder and addiction is so isolating. And so, as a Black woman in recovery, hope must be loud. It grows louder when you ask for help and you're vulnerable. It is the thread that lets you know that no matter what happens, you will be okay.
T-Mobile Home Internet relies on cell phone towers, so when the network gets busy, things can slow down.
I hate peak time.
Get faster, more reliable internet speeds. Get Spectrum.
At Spectrum News, we're committed to strengthening the fabric of local communities through our reporting, with stories that inspire and news that matters. Streaming live on your smart TV and connected devices, plus on-demand weather forecasts. It's all there as you step outside with the Spectrum News mobile app, keeping you informed and in the know throughout your day. Spectrum News Plus, local stories connecting communities. Exclusively for Spectrum customers. Now available on your favorite devices.
Whether it's our stories, the warmth of our laugh, or our family's secret sauce, we all bring something different to the table. So make some space. The power of connection is waiting right outside your comfort zone. Learn how you can help strengthen your community at belongingbeginswithus.org/teamup.
I'm meteorologist Ian Cassette with your weather on the ones. This week's going to be busy. We have lots going on, multiple systems passing through. To begin with, for Tuesday, we will have some stormy weather in the southeast and rain extended farther to the north. Then in the west, we've got a system, a large one at that, offshore, leading to big snow and rain in the Pacific Northwest. We will eventually see a pattern flip here this week in the east, kind of cooling things down because as you can see, those temperatures here on Tuesday, very mild, 60s in Ohio, up in Chicago, 62 degrees, 57 degrees in New York. But to the west, that's where all the cooler air has been, all behind this system. That front is going to continue moving eastward, and it's working with some ample tropical moisture. So through Tuesday afternoon into the evening, expect very heavy rain along the panhandle of Florida, up into Georgia and Alabama, where we could have some isolated flooding, along with some severe weather, damaging winds, hail, and an isolated tornado risk, all possible. This system will fall apart into the night. tonight, just leading to some gusty showers across Florida. But the main severe risk and flood risk will be in this region here along the Gulf Coast. That is from Panama City and points to the west. And also that flood risk is mainly across Mobile to Panama City and the Gulf Coast, where we could see a few inches of rainfall in a short period of time. So be mindful there through Tuesday into Tuesday night. On the west coast, it also is going to be very wet. We have a level 2 risk of flooding for Northern California, which is where the atmospheric river will continue to funnel in moisture here through tonight.
Driscoll, you're watching a Spectrum News special report. President Joe Biden is in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil for the final G20 summit of his presidency. He's giving remarks right now. Let's listen in.
With national and local governments, indigenous people and businesses to protect and reforest the Amazon and other forests. That's why, as a U.S. Senator back in the 80s, I first proposed to offer debt relief for countries willing to conserve their forests and other natural resources. As president, I've led the scaling up of the debt for nature swaps, investing $2.5 billion these past 4 years, 10 times the total of what had come before. Let me close with this. When it comes to the adoption of clean energy, we've made remarkable progress together, but we all know we have so much more to do. We all know what it takes. History is watching us. History is watching. I urge us to keep faith and keep going. This is the single greatest existential threat to humanity if we do not deal with climate change. Our children, our great-grandchildren, our great-great-grandchildren, their future is going to be determined by what we do in the next 4 to 6 years. So I urge you all to reach out further. And I'm not going to say any more. I have much more to say, but I'm not going to now. But thank you for focusing on this issue. I really think it's the existential issue humanity faces. Thank you all.
All right, President Biden wrapping up his remarks at the G20 Summit, the last of his presidency. Some very, very brief remarks. Biden discussing his commitment to combating climate change using clean energy, saying this is the greatest threat to humanity and that we have to keep up this fight. Joining me now is Spectrum News Washington, D.C. reporters Kevin Fry and Angie Gonzalez. Angie, let's start with you. Not really what Biden was discussing at this point, but he has been promising to help Ukraine in its war with Russia. As of today, it's been 1,000 days. Over the weekend, Biden approved Ukraine's use of long-range missiles inside of Russia, which Russia says are already being used. What else has the Biden administration been doing to help Ukraine?
Well, very short remarks there from President Biden. Certainly the first time that I'm aware of, Kevin can probably chime in on this as well, that he's gone to one of these G20 summits without making official remarks, just making some brief comments there. He spoke during day one of the summit as well. And part of what he talked about yesterday, Bree, was urging other leaders that were in attendance to help Ukraine. He said that they should continue to do so, saying that under his administration, of course, the U.S. has strongly supported Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. He also pointed out the fact that U.S. support for the war is possibly uncertain under a new Trump administration. So we're going to have to see exactly what happens with that. But he did approve, as you mentioned, Ukraine's use of long-range missiles inside Russia. President Vladimir Putin seems to be responding to that news just earlier today, saying that, or signing a sort of document that lowers the threshold for nuclear war, basically revising a nuclear doctrine, declaring a conventional attack on Russia by any nation that's supported by a nuclear power, which is exactly the situation that you're seeing there with those ATACMS and the U.S. providing them to Ukraine to attack inside Russia. So we're going to have to see whether this is posturing from Russian President Vladimir Putin. Some say it may be, considering that he is expecting a Trump administration to come into office in the next 2 months or so.
All right, Angie, thank you very much. Kevin Fry, let's bring you in here now. Donald Trump will soon be president. What kind of changes can we expect when he takes office, especially in respect to what Biden is meeting with these world leaders about?
Yeah, I mean, look, it seems that the prospect, the reality of Trump taking over the presidency in short order has been kind of the unspoken backroom conversation, I guess is maybe the best way of putting it, of this G20 summit, that this is kind of hanging over everything. And one of the things that we would expect Trump to change is really building off of what he was just talking about there at the summit, which is this idea of combating climate change. He, of course, oversaw, Biden did, the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which included those billions upon billions of dollars of investments in climate resiliency, and it is the largest climate investment in the history of the U.S. Trump, of course, has called climate change a hoax, seems all but inclined to try to roll back some of that spending, or at least slow and stymie its outlay, and obviously would take a different approach when it comes to climate change, including pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, that international agreement to move forward with combating the release of climate-changing chemicals. There's also questions as to whether or not, as Angie was just touching on, he would be as committed, Trump would be, to the Ukrainian cause in terms of supplying aid and munitions to them in their fight against Russia. And then there's also, at least through some of his public statements that we've seen thus far, a very clear sign that he would very much stand on the side of Israel in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. And this comes as we've, of course, seen these G20 leaders call for increased assistance and aid to those in Gaza currently suffering as a result of the conflict.
And Kevin, a follow-up for you now. Some world leaders are already moving past the Biden administration and focusing on the next Trump presidency. Which leaders has he or the transition team already spoken with?
Right. So as mentioned, this is kind of hanging over this entire summit. We do know that he and Benjamin Netanyahu, as the Prime Minister of Israel, spoke very early on, I believe within a day or two after the election was called. And notably, he has also met in person, the first world leader that has met with Trump in person since the election, with the Argentinian president. And notably, just within the last few days, as they've been working on this kind of communique, this final statement from the G20 meeting, apparently the Argentinian president was kind of trying to derail some of the language they had over, for example, an international wealth and billionaire tax. So perhaps doing some of Trump's bidding.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. Angie, Biden becoming the first sitting U.S. president to visit the Amazon rainforest. Explain the motivation for that visit.
Yeah, so this sort of goes back to what Kevin was talking about. You know, this is sort of Biden's swan song, so to speak, when you're talking about the things that he did during his administration. He wants to look back on some of the pillar pieces of legislation that include, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as other pieces of legislation, things he's done in order to address climate change. He actually announced a new partnership with Brazil today. The White House says establishes a climate-forward, clean energy industrial partnership between the two nations. So in addition to the, of course, foreign conflicts that they're talking about at the G20, they're also talking about this issue